Hey, welcome to the Jesus Magnet podcast. You're with Joel Hillary and Joel Thompson, and our guest today is Alex McElroy. Am I saying that right, Alex?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us today, Alex. We're really excited to finally get you on. I mean, we had a bit of a fail the other week regarding apparently New Zealand's in the future. That's right. According to America. So we had the wrong day. But,
Yes.
well, we had the right day,
worries.
and apparently it was the next day for him.
Yeah. No worries. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so Alex has worked, actually, you were just telling us before we started the podcast that you worked with Cross-Examine for a couple of years, and would you be able to just go over all that for our listeners to know who you are and where you're from?
Yeah. So, like I said, my name is Alex McElroy. Currently, I have an organization called The Proof for the Truth, which is an apologetics organization where we provide a yearly conference as well as workshops that churches, organizations, and universities can host. Previously, I kind of fell into apologetics just accidentally and then just started reading. And then I went to Cross-Examine Instructors Academy, who Frank Turek and Jim Warner Wallace, Sean McDowell, Greg Kokel, Richard Howell, these guys run it. Really, it's Frank's organization. And so for 2 years, I trained there. And when I say train, it's not a conference where you go and you sit and listen to speakers. You have to come there having already read certain things. They give you a homework assignment, and you have to present twice in front of different ones of them, and they critique you. So wow. It's kind of intimidating, but it sharpens you. And so I did that for 2 years and then went to the advanced one. And then in between there, I didn't do that. So then I went to train at RZIM. And for some time there, and then I actually ended up serving with RZIM on one of their university missions weeks at the University of Florida, and that's where we're there on campus for a week. There's lunchtime talks, evening talks, but mostly we're trying to engage in conversation with those youth and young adults on their campus, in their territory, just in the middle of the quad or walking to class, whatever. So we have things to draw them into conversation, but I had some great conversations with some very bright young people, and it actually highlighted why we have to engage in apologetics, because the typical, hey, come to church, or, quote this scripture, quote that's not, they're thinking on a level that I wasn't thinking on at that age. And so we have to be able to engage them on their level. And so after I came back from there, I started my first conference, the first Proof for the Truth conference. We're in our third year, should be the fourth, but obviously, last year was a bit strange. And then I went and got my master's in apologetics at Liberty, and I just finished that up last year. Wow,
man, full on study and evangelizing to the young people. That's actually one of the most terrifying things I could think of, is evangelizing to students, like university students. I see.
I'm a former youth pastor though, so it's kind of
good.
Like I've been in youth ministry for close to 15 years or over 15 years, and so high school students is before I ever heard the word apologetics, I was doing that. So yeah.
This is the part of the show where we bombard you with the really hard questions. So get ready.
Yeah. How do you engage in that, with, because one thing that I've noticed with the young people is more and more today, like the growing age of atheism, of if you believe in Christianity, you're sort of perceived as unintelligent. And how do you intelligently articulate the truth of the gospel to them without sounding like a blind faith believer?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And so for me, I guess it's possibly
probably
easier because I'm
not a 30-second answer, is it?
No, it's not. But because I'm brought in to speak at a youth or young adult group or ministry or organization, nonprofit, like me coming in there to do that allows me to do that. So going in cold, just talking to, a random teenager or college kid, that is a bit of a difficult thing. But there are some ways in. You got to find that common ground or find that common struggle and just start to kind of peel back the layers. As much as I talk about the scientific evidence, and we'll probably get into some of that, the real questions of today that I find, especially with that generation, and as you mentioned, like the statistics are staggering. I think currently they say 65 to 70% of young people end up walking away from the faith by the time they get through college. But it's because they heard something from a professor or professors that they couldn't reconcile with what they grew up learning or grew up hearing in church. And so it's not because the professor's saying the truth and we're saying a lie. It's because they're not being told the whole truth. So what we as parents, as pastors, as youth pastors have to get better at is exposing our young people to the truth in totality and not being scared. I actually, my kids are 9 and 6. I started teaching my oldest daughter apologetics when she was 7. And I'm not talking about the Kalam cosmological argument or stuff like that, but kind of stuff on her level, just getting her to think about how do we assess truth? How do you know this is true or that's not true? How do you think, what is evidence? What does that actually mean? And so just getting them to think about those things. And I've introduced her to atheism. I brought up that idea to her. So sometimes our young people get to school and they feel like we were hiding something from them because we were too scared to bring it up. So as she gets older, I'm going to bring up Hinduism and Buddhism and every other ism.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to be the first one to bust that bubble because I want her to know there's nothing to be scared of. We're standing on solid ground.
For sure, because the unknown definitely seems like a right hook, doesn't it? If you've never heard of it, and especially if your dad's a youth pastor or something like that, and then someone goes, well, what if God's not real? And you've never really thought of that. It's like, I don't know how to answer that, and therefore, why has my dad never told me that? So good that you're equipping your daughter at such a young age.
Yeah, try and there's really good resources now. So Jim Warner Wallace, who I mentioned, kind of a friend and mentor of mine, he does cold case Christianity. He himself, if you know his story, he's a cold case detective, came to faith, I think at 35 or something, by using his police training to examine the Gospels, and found out they stood up to the test, that these are valid. So further investigation, and then he became a believer. But he has written Cold Case Christianity for Kids. So then when my daughter was 8, I guess 8, when she could really read and understand the book, then we read it together, or she pretty much read it. She did all the worksheets, she filled in all the answers, and I was happy at the end where she chose to make a profession of faith based on the evidence. So she was in church, we were in church, but once you get them to think through it on their own, now I'm secure that she's secure because I didn't tell her, hey, this is what you need to believe. Yeah, this is what she came to believe because she was able to see why. Even when there was somebody who said something in her class and they said something about some people believe in science and some people believe in religion, and she was able to push back and say, well, no, you don't have to pick and choose,
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. So when she goes into school and she's got all her friends and stuff like that, she might be one of the go-tos now for actual truth. Where's the checklist on how to logically figure out what's true and what's untrue? Because every day at the moment, everything's subjective, which is a self-defeating truth in itself, because that would be an objective truth if everything's subjective.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Is that statement true? Right.
Exactly.
And I, we gotta be cautious because I don't want her going into school telling everybody they're wrong. At this point, at their age now, I want them just to grow in their security. And at a certain point, then they can be more vocal if they choose to be. But I don't want her going into 4th grade, telling everybody and the teacher that no, that's not true, or that I'm like, baby, just listen what they're saying, learn it, but we're going to talk about some things here at home.
100%. Yeah.
So does that, just to bring it back to you and how you got into apologetics and everything, does that actually have a a place in your story of finding faith and, finding the Lord? Or when did you first gain interest in apologetics?
Yeah. So for me, now I was actually saved probably about 10 years old. So my story is interesting, but the reason I say it was probably around 10, because I know it happened. My dad passed when I was 11, and I know it was before that. So both my parents, great, raised us the right way, all the type of stuff. The struggles that I had growing up, obviously my dad getting sick and he passed, and then a couple of years ago, my mom passed away, and she had a autoimmune issue prior to that kind of led to that. So, but both of them never wavered in their faith throughout all the illness and sickness. For me, I think there was just probably some unresolved issues in me that I just, never went to counseling or anything, didn't know. So in college, I went kind of way off the deep end, and I got involved in a lot of stuff I shouldn't have been involved in. We'll say that. Then my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, which is a whole nother story, she was an atheist. And even then, though, I was like the worst Christian around, so I couldn't really call her out. But she kind of knew what I thought about God on a general level, but I didn't even really know how deep I thought about it. I just kind of believed, based on things I heard, based on things I've seen and miracles and different people and stuff like that. So there was not a lot of doubt about the existence of God, but I didn't have a deep faith. So
did that hinder your relationship with your girlfriend?
Not at first. Now, so if people go to my YouTube channel, we had a testimony video made of how she got saved, because it was kind of a miracle of how that happened, which I won't go into the whole thing now. So when I got out of college, maybe a couple years after that, I could kind of feel the Lord pulling me back to him. And at this point, your question, that's when it started to be a struggle, because the only little bit of Bible I knew was like the two can't be unequally yoked, and like this won't work. And so at the same time, my mom always used to send me books. I never read them. And so I would put them in the back of the closet. And so one day I said, let me go get a book and be a good son and, see what this is. The first book I pull out the closet is The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel.
Yeah.
So when I read it, that was the first time I ever heard the word apologetics. And I'm a very logical, things make sense type of person. And so it just appealed to the way I think, because I was never looking for evidence. I wasn't wavering to that point. I needed to grow for sure in my faith, but I wasn't wavering. But it piqued my interest. And so I kept reading other books. And then eventually, that was like 2006 or 5. So it was probably 10 years later it was about 10 years later before I went to cross-examine. So most of it was just kind of me being interested and reading on my own, listening to podcasts and YouTube, and just kind of growing in my own understanding. And then I was like, you know what, I think based on the way the youth are now, like I need formal, solid training here.
Yeah, wow. Did you go to one of Frank Turek's, like, I see on YouTube all the time, he's always at those campuses, and people are lining up asking him these difficult questions. Were you one of those people?
No, not at all. I was still half in the world, half out. Not in that year, but when I first read the Lee Strobel book.
Yeah.
Then when I was fully invested back in church, 2006. That's also the year my wife got saved. A lot changed that year. And then I was like, okay, let me grow in this. And I started teaching in church probably 2008, became a minister, then became a pastor. And then the year I went to cross-examine was the first year I ever heard of Frank Turek.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure how that happened. I think somebody brought it up to me. I brought it to my pastor, like, hey, can I go do this training? I think it'll be beneficial for the church. And he said, yeah. And then the rest is history.
Wow. So with all that training and all that, what would be your like go-to for if you were to talk to an atheist? Because I know that this podcast, we're going to talk a fair bit about naturalism, but I think that's a bit of a key for atheism in a lot of ways, because they believe in an only material world. and to get that across to them that there might be something outside of materialism. That's probably, would that be what a logical key to a logical truth to unfold and teach?
Yeah. So, so what would I say to an atheist? You're asking?
Yeah. So, I mean, they're the ones, for me personally, when I'm talking, I quite like talking to atheists, but I do feel under-equipped sometimes, and I'd just like to know, like, what is the most important truth that atheism probably sits on that is untrue?
So there's so much, because a lot of it is a misconception about what we actually believe in the first place. So Greg Koukl, who wrote Tactics, is a great book. In it, he has these 3 questions I think it's in the Columbo tactic that we should ask. So I teach these questions these are good questions to engage. So the first question is, what do you mean by that? So if somebody says, I don't believe in God, you ask, so what do you mean by God? Like, tell me what your idea of God is. So at least we can see if we're on the same page or not. Because sometimes, I mean, if you say, well, I don't believe in God, I mean, this dragon in the sky with 6 wings, and like hold on, like that's not who I believe either. So sometimes it starts from just a clarification of terminology.
Yeah.
And that can even venture into a lot of stuff, because then people want to say, well, they're all religions are the same. Like, no, because Buddhism doesn't even posit a God. So it's clearly not the same. Hinduism has 300 million gods. So that's not the same. And Islam denies Jesus. So it's not the same. So you got to tell me where your disagreement lies specifically. And if it's with something that we as Christians actually believe, now we can talk about it. So the first question is, what do you mean by that?
Okay.
The second question is, how did you come to that conclusion?
Okay.
So in this day and age of Google in our pocket, I don't know how old you guys are. I think we're roughly in the same bracket, but there used to be this thing when we had an assignment in school where you had to go to the library and you had to look stuff up, and you had to like go a card catalog, and you had to check out books. Now people think, well, I can just go to YouTube, I can just go to Google, and that's where my answer is. Maybe. Have they vetted their sources is the question.
Yeah. So
my question is like, how did you come to that conclusion? And if the only thing you can tell me is, well, I heard such and such, or they said, well, who's they? Who's this nebulous? I need, there's a lot of books here, and those books have sources of their own.
Yeah.
And like, they're not just there for show. So you can disagree with me. I love something Vince Vitale says. He's one of the directors at RZIM. And he said, disagreement's okay, but disagreement without alternative is empty. So you can't just say, I don't believe you're right, and then stop. Okay, well, what do you believe? Because the universe exists, we exist, people exist. That has to be explained somehow. Yeah. Now, if you don't like my explanation, cool, but you have to have a better one. Yeah. So if you don't have a better one, then we can talk about Occam's razor or just reasoning, abductive reasoning, whatever you want to say. Logic dictates that we go with the best option on the table, even if it doesn't fit our
feelings,
our feelings, our desire, or our bias, or whatever you want to call it. The third question is, have you considered? And this is where you can kind of introduce the gospel, introduce some aspects of Christianity that maybe they just haven't considered. Because once you ask, what do you mean by that? And so a lot of times they can't tell you what they mean. And then you ask, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? And all they can cite is Wikipedia. And then now they're like, well, I really don't have a good reason to believe what I believe. Now you can ask, well, have you considered, like, what if Jesus really did come? What if he is the Son of God? What if he did die on the cross and raise again? What would that mean for you? What would that mean in reality?
Yeah. It's such a
now
truth.
At least it's a softer entrance.
Yeah, because that's definitely something that I think most people get so on autopilot today. Like just go to your job and just rinse and repeat, and they never actually ponder the thought: what if Jesus was real? What if there is a God out there that loves me? What if there is a way for me to, be forgiven of all my debts and my sins and things like that.
You asked, sorry, real quick. You asked a question before, and I think it was with dealing with youth. And so here's the other entrance point, especially with youth and young adults, really anybody. But so a lot of times, I speak, and then there's the Q&A afterwards, right? The Q&A is the most important part, because that's where the real dialogue and questions get unearthed. But a lot of the questions, as much as I talk about the scientific arguments and DNA and what that means and teleology and all these different things, that's usually, sometimes it is, but it's usually not where their doubt lies about Christianity. It's more existential in the sense that, does life really have meaning? Do I really have a purpose in life? What is the real morality, and how do I know?
Yeah.
And so you have to sometimes ask a couple questions, because they usually don't start with that question. They kind of mask it with a surface level question to kind of, okay, well, if I can just ask this and they can't answer it, then Christianity is not true. That I don't have to worry about the real question.
Yeah.
But if we peel back the layers and we can get to the real thing, because hopelessness is a real thing. Suicide is on the rise. And part of the reasons is because naturalism, it leaves you void. Even if it was true, it would still leave you void. There is no way in naturalism to objectively substantiate meaning in life. Like, if naturalism is true, there is no meaning in life. Now, that may just be the way it is. Maybe it is. But either then you have to create some kind of moral standard, invent it, or you become ultimately nihilistic, like Friedrich Nietzsche, who realized, well, God is dead and we've killed him and everything sucks now. So
yeah.
I'm paraphrasing the poem of the madman, but where do you go from there? Because if it's just blind, random evolutionary forces, there's no meaning in that.
It's true. If it becomes there's no good or evil as well, and that's what
there's no good or evil.
Frank Turek constantly says, that what Hitler did wasn't wrong then, and
right.
If it was wrong, it's just your opinion.
Right.
Well, that brings up something else too, because how much in Cross-Examined and RZIM and stuff like that do you guys talk about worldview? Because worldview is actually one of my favorite studies on this as well, because it's one of the funny things is you can get to the bottom of people's assumptions really quick, because they go, well, truth is relative. And like you said, so if there's no right or wrong, then what Hitler did wasn't wrong. And, I think the most common response is just mostly people go, well, come on. Well, hey, and it's like there's almost a foundation of like, well, you and I can both agree that was pretty bad. And it's like, well, yes, but that is actually based on our worldview. And also, either I would say you would admit that there is a moral law then, or that's just our worldview. Because you go, well, I'm okay with teaching my children about don't murder, but I'm not going to tell them there is a God. You know what I mean? But different worldviews have different values placed on life. Different worldviews have completely different decision-making paradigms. And
absolutely.
So what do you guys? What have you learned in terms of worldview and the different worldviews you encounter?
Yeah, that's really good, because we all have, either through growing up a certain way, certain location, certain religion, whatever the case is, no one comes in as a blank slate. Was it Kant, I believe, who posited the tabula rasa? I might be saying it wrong. Just the blank slate. I don't think there is a blank slate, because you all come in with some sort of presupposition or bias based on your parents or whatever. So your worldview is simply how you see the world. We can overcomplicate it, but that's essentially what it is. So now I don't know if you have this conversation day one, but I do talk about like epistemology and ontology. And so just for listeners to understand those terms for themselves, even so that we can understand why they're important. So epistemology is this branch of philosophy that it's the study of how you know what you know, how we come to know what we know, right? Ontology is it focuses on the nature of existence itself, like what actually is real. So we can say the universe is an ontological reality, how do we know that? We have telescopes, we have scientists, we have this and that. But was there a way that we could have known that prior to those things? Right. Could God have revealed those things? Is that a valid epistemological method? So my question in a more, I guess, layman term would be like, how do you know that that's wrong? How do you know that torturing children is wrong? How do you know that murder is wrong and rape is wrong and these things are wrong? I agree with you, and that's the other thing. Always try to find points of agreement. So, like you said, we agree these things are wrong.
Yeah.
And here's the other part: you don't need to know God to know they're wrong. So I think sometimes as Christians, we push too hard to make God the reason we know those things when we don't have to. And I'm saying Scripture doesn't even mandate that. If you look at Romans 2:14 and 15, it says God has written the law in their hearts, regardless of if they know him or not. And could you imagine if he didn't, how much more bloodshed there would be? So here's the point. I always say you don't need to know God to know right from wrong, but there can't be right and wrong if there is no God.
Yeah.
Essentially, you give credit to whom credit is due. So if I go to the Sistine Chapel and I look at this thing by Michelangelo and I can say, man, this is amazing, this is beautiful, and I say, yeah, Michelangelo did that, and you say, yeah, but I don't worry about that. I just want to see how beautiful it is. It doesn't matter who did it. Well, yeah, it does matter who did it because it didn't just happen.
It's good.
So I want to get people back to square one. One of the huge things that naturalism falls short on for me is, let's say there's 10 steps. They start at step 3 and reason to step 10 and get to the conclusion. But the first 2 steps are critical. If you can't explain those, then how do I know I can trust your worldview? James Tour, really well-known scientist, I've talked to only once or twice, but he's I don't even know how to say it. It's a nano engineer, chemist. I don't know. He does research. He's a Christian as well. He does a lot of research on origin of life. Huh?
Works on tiny things.
Yes, works on tiny things. And he does a lot of origin of life research. And this is known by atheist, Christian scientists, all scientists in those fields. It's not publicized this way to our children in school or to the public. They have no idea about origin of life. Naturalism on the most extreme scientific levels, they cannot explain the origin of life. They can't recreate it in a lab when they're cheating.
They got no clue.
Huh?
They got no clue unless they add a creator.
Even when you give them the right setup, if you give them all the amino acids and you give them the proper parameters for how they connect, and they go in a lab and try to recreate it, they still can't create what we actually have.
Yeah.
And that's with a mind cheating. So this is the other part, because you mentioned that naturalism is only natural material things. So if I can show one metaphysical or one supernatural reality that we agree on, naturalism has to fall. Right? Like it has to. And so part of my master's, the 40-page final paper, at least the first part, and if I do my PhD, which I'm debating, it'll be more like an elaboration of this. Basically that there are so I mentioned epistemology. There are epistemic gaps in naturalism.
Okay.
So they go here and they can't figure out anything here, but then go here.
Yeah.
Well, how'd you get here?
Yeah.
People can't see my hands. I'm doing something with my hands. I have one hand here and one hand way over here. You have to be able to justify from your worldview how you got from A to B.
Yeah.
Or A to D, I should say. If you can't, then maybe that's not the right worldview. The problems, and I'll bring out 2 or 3 examples. I think it was John Lennox. He teaches at Oxford. He said that the success of science sometimes leads people to think that because we can understand the mechanisms, so because we can understand the law of gravity or the strong and weak nuclear forces that of the universe, then we can safely conclude that there was no God who designed and created the universe in the first place. And the reasoning that commits a logical fallacy. So I do a lot of stuff in philosophy. It commits a logical fallacy or a logical error because it confuses mechanism with agency. If I see a car Just because I can explain how an engine works doesn't mean Henry Ford never existed.
Yeah.
Right? Like that doesn't logically follow. So this is also why most of science, if you look through history, most scientists going back to the 16th, 17th century were Christians. They got into science because they expected certain regularities in the natural universe.
Yeah.
Because they knew God was consistent.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like Samuel Morse, John Clark Maxwell,
Yeah.
George Washington Carver, Isaac Newton.
Yep.
In fact, so we're in this situation now. Isaac Newton got sent home from university because of the plague, because they were quarantined because of the plague in Europe, which is much worse than anything we're experiencing. During his time in quarantine, he invented calculus. It's like, man, what have I been doing? He worked on like gravitational laws of motion. He probably went back to school and taught his professors some things.
That's awesome.
I just bench press some tires.
Yeah.
And like watch Netflix.
I've had the opportunity recently in the last 6 months or so. I've interviewed astrophysicist Dr. Hugh Ross, who I know.
Oh, wow.
Biochemist Fazal Rana, particle physicist Michael Strauss. Now, wow. Dr. Rana
really?
and Dr. Ross, they were atheists.
Yeah.
The way they became Christian was when they got into their field of study.
Yeah.
So I think we need to understand that science, not only does it not contradict your faith in God, it can actually lead you to faith in God.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a really cool story that is about an atheist scientist and God, and he says to God, you know, I think I can do everything that you can do. I've worked everything out, you know, through science. And then God goes, all right, let's do a wager. Let's make a rose. Whoever can make a rose wins. So atheist scientist goes, yeah, all right, let's do it. So God just takes all of the universe and all the material on it and puts it on his side, and the scientist is left with nothing. And God makes a rose, just creates one, and then the atheist goes, "Hang on, I need the dirt to make my rose flourish. You know, can I have some dirt?" He said, "No, that's all my stuff." Says God, "You've got to be able to create it with nothing." Off you go. And I think it's such a good story, good illustration for like that's how atheists try and get to that one point where they're like, yeah, we can create, even if they could create things using the material things. It's that origin that you're talking about, right back, wind the clock all the way back.
Right.
Can you do anything beyond that point?
Right.
And you can't without the creator. It's
right.
Yeah.
And that point, and it's so interesting when you hear, I'm talking about top level atheists, Stephen Hawking, who's passed, look at Neil deGrasse Tyson, Richard Dawkins, all these different people. When we say, create ex nihilo, out of nothing, when we say nothing, we mean no thing.
Yeah. Like
not a particle, not a hydrogen atom, like nothing. So whenever they'll say, well, yeah, if you had this, then you can create this. And that leads to, no. You can't start with something. You have to start with nothing.
Yeah.
Even if you say gravity, that's something. Even if you say one particle, even if you say, whatever you could say, a quark, whatever you say, that's something.
It has to be a total vacuum.
Total.
Do they even exist? I know in space it's not totally a vacuum.
Vacuums in space? Do they exist?
I think they're almost vacuums, isn't it?
There's no dirt to vacuum up.
I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about even what is inside of black holes and dark energy. There's just a lot people don't know.
Yeah.
But once again, let's go from just what we do know. And when I was talking with Hugh Ross, and he worked down every level, and we can talk about the teleology and the number of the hundreds of constants that are in the universe. That not just there's 300 constants, but they all have to be working simultaneously in conjunction from the beginning.
Yeah,
like that's I asked somebody, well, which came first? Because if we want to talk about macroevolution, what came first, your circulatory system or your respiratory system?
Yeah, that's good.
Doesn't matter.
That is good.
How does your, what does your circulatory system need? It needs oxygen. Okay, but there is no respiratory system. Where is it going to get it? And vice versa. What does your respiratory system need? It needs blood. So it's like a car engine. If all the parts aren't there in working order from the beginning, there is nothing alive to evolve to or from. So like those logical inconsistencies are some things that I think most people can understand those examples, and it at least will cause them to think twice. Like, yeah, how do you get to the next step?
Yeah.
Michael B. He's done a lot of work on how, I think, is it Michael B? Yeah. When we talk, in biology class, there's the 8-part breakdown classification of human, or not just humans, but species. So it goes kingdom, phylum, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So scientists have realized that Darwinian evolution can't get you past genus. Well, in order to have the diversity of life that we have, that has to be a possibility. How do you start with primordial ooze and get dogs and cats and snakes and whales and like, how do you get that level of diversity where you're now going into different phylums and domains and kingdoms? But biologists have seen and proven, I'm not talking about Christian ones, I'm just talking about in general, they can't make the case, and they haven't seen evidence that you can get out of the genus level. Maybe a little bit into family, but you can't exit it.
Okay.
A dog, like even Darwin, he noticed the birds, but it was still a bird. The beak shape changed, but it's still a bird.
Yeah. It didn't change species. It could change kinds over time, lots of time.
Right.
But species is different. What's your thoughts on? There's a theory on. There's a belief in theistic evolution as well. Would you say that's logically consistent? Like, if it is true, then God's sort of dictating, guiding evolution, because it's still incredibly, what is it? I say impossible,
Improbable.
Yeah, I personally don't believe it. I don't see. I wouldn't make it a salvific issue, because at the end of the day, and this is where I say that. So what Christians and atheists agree on, which sometimes they realize and sometimes they don't, is like once they prove, and I say like Einstein and later with the discovery of the great galaxy seeds and the radiation afterglow in the early universe. So all these things conclusively proved that the universe had a beginning. So that's why they talk about the Big Bang. I don't really care what you call it. It had a starting point.
Yeah.
Now, logically, you had to have a starting point. We don't even need all those sets, but you had to have a starting point because the universe can't be eternal. If the universe is eternal, we would never arrive at today.
Yes.
That's just a logical inconsistency. So anyway, Einstein called his own discovery irritating because he didn't like where it was leading him. Because now once you posit a beginning, you have to posit a beginner.
That's true. Yeah.
Not a lot of way out. So there has to be an uncaused first cause. So here's the thing. Most scientists, Christian or atheists, agree on that. We just disagree on who or what it is.
Yeah.
Now, we have an answer that God is the best explanation for why there's something rather than nothing. Their explanation currently is we're still working on it.
Yeah.
So,
but that's the whole
cool.
detective thing all over again. You're like, it's okay for them to be like, no, I don't believe it's God, but they have to be able to say, because I believe the evidence leads this way, and that part they don't have quite yet.
Right.
I had a friend of mine just recently, when I was over for dinner, she said that she was a vegetarian, and I went, is that an ethical? Are you a vegetarian for ethical reasons or just for health reasons? And she said, well, Joel, I watched this documentary, and I went, don't show me the documentary. And she said, yeah, because as soon as you know the truth behind it, your mindset, and I'm like, my mindset to maybe eat animals could change because it could be a truth that's revealed to me. And and I know, I'm like, I don't want to know that truth because it might cause me to change. If I don't know it, then I can claim to be oblivious to that truth, and then I don't have the moral, I don't feel bad about eating animals. Believe it or not, I'm actually gone into pescatarian, so I eat fish and veggies at the moment. But so it's it was an interesting little conversation because it was like, man, that's actually kind of like atheism. I think they don't want to be shown what the truth is because then that revelation of truth, they come to a crossroads. All right, I actually have to acknowledge this because I know it now. I have to please don't tell me, and a lot of people don't search for that reason because they know that if it's true, then oh man, I have to change now. I
always say that, especially when we're talking about the validity of the Bible and resurrection and stuff like that, and when you examine objectively the evidence for the texts that now make up the Bible, and the manuscript evidence and the historical evidence, archaeological evidence, if you're being honest and objective, there's no reason to doubt the validity of what's written now. So the issue is not, can I trust the accuracy of the documents, is am I willing to submit to what's in them?
Yeah.
In other words, it's not a head issue, it's a heart issue. And like you said, that's usually, and people won't necessarily admit that, but that's usually where it boils down. Because I there's many conversations that I'll go through these evidences, scientific evidence and teleology, and they see it, they're like, okay, yeah. But then it always comes down to, but I don't I want to do this, or God wants me to do this, or I don't want to stop. Like now it's volitional. It's about, you want this certain lifestyle. You want to do your own morality. You essentially want to be your own God. That's what people want. They want to be a God unto themselves.
Yep.
Which is fine. I mean, if that's what you want, at least admit it. Just say that, but don't pretend like it's not true, because
it's true.
And for a guy like you too, you would know this way better than I would. But if you're speaking to some of these academics about the existence of God, I mean, for them to admit in the existence of God is probably going to lose them a fair bit of respect in the scientific community as well. And so it's this counting the cost thing where it's like, you know what, I am giving up my right to dictate my own morality. I'm also giving up my reputation. I mean, that is a cost that we've all counted in different ways as followers of Christ. But have you encountered that before too? People just like resistant because of those reasons?
I know of people who, I won't name anybody, but they waited, essentially, some of them, until they got tenure to really reveal where they were really at with the God question.
Wow.
Because they knew they were at risk. Now some were more bold and they were like, I don't care, I'm just going to say what I say.
Yep.
And some people have lost jobs or not gotten tenure. And so you're right, it is a real risk. It's not for me. But I do know people, people who are well respected in their field, as far as, they know their stuff, they're at the top of their field. But if what I see points me to God, then all of a sudden that's the problem for you. Even though everything else I said we agree on, you agree with, you peer reviewed my articles and everything, and so it is a risk. You're right, and we all face that risk, as you said, in different facets of our lives.
Sure.
Even I don't know, when you release this podcast, you may get some negative comments from somebody. I'm always surprised because my YouTube channel is relatively small. I'm in the process of growing it. I'm like, how did you even find me? Like, I'm so small.
Well, how do we promote it?
Search it.
How do we promote it? What's it called?
Relentless Pursuit of Purpose.
Relentless Pursuit of Purpose on YouTube.
Relentless Pursuit. Yeah,
I love it.
Awesome.
Yep.
Also, Alex has a fantastic book that I have came across, Blueprint for Bible Basics.
Yes.
So definitely get into that. I haven't read it yet, but I think I'm going to get a copy.
Yes, it's a good tool. So I wrote it during my time in youth ministry. So that's a good tool if you're trying to just give the basics to somebody who's a teenager. It has a study guide in it. It's not purely apologetic, but there is some information in there that level. But I just wanted to cover the basics, like who is God, what is the Bible, how do you pray, what is prayer, what is worth, how do we know the resurrection is true, those types of things.
Yeah.
I do need to do a part or second volume. So hopefully maybe in the next month or two I'll get on that. But
Yeah.
I think definitely now with my experiences it'll be a thicker volume, and it'll be a little different, and it'll be more for everybody as opposed to just for teens.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I can probably tell you what part of the podcast I don't like, and that's because when you get into things like young Earth and old Earth and stuff, it's like there's such a polarizing like group in the Christian world. And I liked what you said. You were like, hey, I wouldn't make it a salvific issue, but like this is just what I believe in. Man, I wouldn't make it a salvific issue either, but there's going to be someone who's like, yeah, this is the one and only thing, and I think one of the interesting things to me, probably my most fascinating, like the most fascinating thing in the world to me is just the concept of eternity. And it is that when you talk about something came from nothing, the element I think that is sort of the fallback, at least from atheist arguments that I've heard, is time. And is like, well, you know what? If there's just enough particles, because if you talk about the likelihood of this kind of thing happening, it's trillions to one or more than trillions to one. I actually don't know, but it's very unlikely. And then it's like, well, in the element of time and eternity, anything can happen. It would eventually happen. It's like the monkey on the typewriter. If he had eternity, he would eventually recreate all of Shakespeare. And you know what I mean? Because it would true random inside of eternity is actually...
That's awesome.
Yeah. So,
and it's also, that's a false paradigm, I think. So I think this is where I try to distinguish between the kind of, even as I'm promoting my YouTube channel, the YouTube atheist versus the professorial atheist. In other words, there's things that you can't get away with in academic circles that you can get away with online.
You don't do that. Alex McElroy destroys atheist videos.
That's not my flavor. I do subtly, but not like come out and target specific people. But we do target specific people in one way. So actually, on Monday, but he's a Christian pastor, or at least he claims to be, and for that. It's not really targeting him, it's targeting his ideas, but that is, to me, a salvific issue because some of the things he's saying are leading people astray who think they're saved, who think they're in line with Christ.
What would be an example of that being, not narrowing down any church in particular, but probably in many churches they might preach something that could affect eternity today. That's false.
He's a super progressive Christian. He says that openly. So actually, even tomorrow we're going to do some stuff dealing with millennials, mysticism, and some other stuff. So to your point, this mysticism, New Age spirituality that has crept in some of our churches, where it's not Jesus is the only way, Jesus is one way, and burning sage and crystals and all this other extra things that they introduce. He, on one of his videos, and this is what piqued our interest in one of the groups I'm in, he said Jesus was racist and he had to repent of his racism just like all of us do. Like, what? Then he said on another one, he said, and he's quoting scripture while he does this. That's why it's scary. He said there is no hell. He said a lot of different things. So he's also very popular. And so that to me, it needs to be debunked, not because I want to attack him, but because his ideas need to be attacked. We did a group of us on Steve Harvey, because he went over to, you saw the video, I don't know. He went to the UAE or one of those countries over there, And he was trying to make this whole case about how beautiful Islam is, and it's the same as Christianity, and it's all one God. And no, that's just factually not true.
Yeah.
But here's the irony of that, because I released a video on Monday about tolerance, or the intolerance of tolerance. This whole I want to be tolerant of everything is not what people think it is. First of all, it's not a theological issue; it's a grammar issue, or vocabulary issue. Terminology. A prerequisite for tolerance is disagreement. Like Joel, if you say something, if you say black is the best color and I say I agree, I'm not tolerating you. I agree with you. But if you say black is the best color and I say no, it's red, but I will tolerate your position.
Yeah.
That's tolerance.
Yeah. So
the world is screaming, you don't tolerate me, but in their mind they're thinking you don't tolerate me because you don't agree with me. But that's not what it means.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know how we got here, but the point I was trying to make was we're going to attack those ideas.
Sure.
So I always try to make it about, like, when I do it, I'm attacking these ideas as logically inconsistent.
Yeah.
I'm not really attacking the person, although the person said what they said. So that would be my answer. Now, back to your point, Joel, about the young, old. Once again, it's not salvific. I do know people who will argue vehemently on their side of it.
Yeah.
In fact, I was giving a talk at a young adult ministry earlier last year, and there's like 150 young adults in the room. Awesome time, great talk, did the Q&A, great. I'm closing out, I'm at the table, people are buying books, I'm talking to more people. And this one lady is sitting here, and she's definitely not a young adult. This is in a church, right? So most of the people it's kind of thinning out, people are kind of leaving. And then she approaches, and all she wants to do, I had to kind of wait for her to make her real point. She was trying to convince me of young earth. And she kept pushing, and I was like, well, what about this and this and this? And then I said, there's one thing I said, and she didn't have any response to it, because she was talking about sin and death. And I was like, well, this pertains to humans, not to everything. So, and she had never heard that. And that's not to say that I'm right. It's just saying, have you really thought this all the way through?
Yeah.
Have you really thought this all the way through, that you're so confident that it can only be the way you're thinking? That, and even when we look at the words, and we can talk about the word day, and like, a lot of people have done work on this. That interpretation of the young earth is not the one be all end all way to look at that. And a lot of theologians say that. So I don't argue with people about that. I'm like, if that's what you think, that's what. Yeah. I'll see you in heaven, and when we get there, we can ask God.
That's right. Well, I heard I did a Bible school just this past year through quarantine and into the year a little bit with YWAM, and the thing about YWAM is it's an interdenominational organization, so there is not a fixed theology. And so what they taught in this course was not the position of YWAM, but it was this speaker's position. And but I really liked what he said about the creation account, where he read it over, and he talked about worldview and the origins of worldview. And he said, look, this text, it's very poetic. If you look at the type of literature biblically, and you think about the audience, and then also contrasting other worldviews like Canaanite and Egyptian worldview. And he said, Moses wrote this account, so it was already, there were already these established kingdoms. He said, look, this just doesn't really answer the complexity of scientific questions that we have about the origin of the universe. He goes, so right away, we can pretty much say, look, this doesn't tell us how the world was created, but it tells us why. And he contrasted the scripture to the other worldviews that were clashing with the Israelites at that time. And it's a beautiful comparison of how God showed his intentionality through the creation account. But for me, I was like, man, that leaves me so much more open-minded to how creation began and what happened. But yeah, then you can go study the science for what it is. You can read the Bible for what it is, and it's not that the Bible has to be your scientific textbook.
Exactly. And it was never meant to be that. It was never meant to be that.
I definitely gravitate towards the old Earth
Okay.
thought. I heard of a really interesting theory regarding Noah's flood actually being the second flood. Have you heard of that, Alex?
I haven't heard that, but I have. I think even when I was talking with Dr. Ross and others, that it's difficult to explain the quantity of water on the planet without some sort of flood event.
Yeah.
So that's something that does validate that event. But yeah, I haven't heard that part.
Yeah, it's from the almost one of the first passages in the Bible that the world's that God, the Spirit of God's hovering over the waters of the earth, and the earth is in chaos, and that when he speaks about bringing dry land forth and things like that, it's not that he's creating anything. The only thing that he creates, if you go back to the original Greek or Hebrew, whatever it's in, it's saying that he bringing forth these things, and the only term it says create is when it's talking about Adam and Eve, as if it was already there, like the seeds and all that of the trees and things like that, and then and when God says, "I'm never going to flood the earth again," it might be implying that he's done it before. So just, it was a really interesting theory. Again, not saying for any listeners that this is Bible. This is just an interesting theory that sometimes sparks the interest. But
I'm interested.
Yeah, it's cool.
And this is why I'm perfectly fine talking about all these things, and I have like behind the scenes conversations like this because to me, and I'm sure to you, these are fun.
Yeah,
I'm a Bible nerd, I'm a theology nerd, so this is fun for us. It's not fun for everybody, but like publicly, and this is what I've told some people, that it makes the church look bad when we're having these public debates that should be internal debates.
Yeah.
Like I'll talk with people about cessationism and this and that, but I'm not going to do it online. Because it just gets contentious, and the world is looking to see, do you have something to offer that's better than the dysfunction I'm already in? If we look dysfunctional, it's like, well, I think I'll stay where I'm at.
We actually did this podcast because we've got a few of our friends. One of our friends, who was Mike, he was going to be on this podcast with us, but he's away at the moment. But he's got these incredible theories that are not taught in church because, again, they're not like a salvation issue. Like it doesn't affect the big picture, but they're interesting topics and they don't need to be shared in church. But this podcast is, anything's on the table,
right?
And we're just talking about it as a, to tickle your fancy sort of thing. Like it's interesting, it's fun, it's one of those sort of things. But we always like to say, everything that we talk about, bring yourself back to the Bible, test the scriptures, and listen to the Holy Spirit for truth and revelation. Don't just run with this theory and be like, this because this guy said it on a podcast. It's still take it back to the source, which is the Bible and the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely. As far as kind of one of the proof that I would offer, just to say there has to be a creator. So we can reason from, intelligent design to who is the intelligent designer, and then we get, that doesn't prove Jesus and that doesn't prove resurrection, but you go step by step. So when we think of DNA evidence, and I don't mean in the way of police investigations, I mean like, what is DNA? It is a system of messages. It is the most complex system of messages ever devised. So Werner Gitt, who's a engineer in technology or something like that, and he classified these 5 levels of information. And so there's syntax, co-syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and apobetics. So when you were talking about the monkey on the typewriter, that's the statistic level. Or sorry, that's the first level, statistics. That's like, if I sit on my keyboard and something comes out, that's that. Now, is that information? Not good information. It's not actionable information. and you move up the ladder, and then you can have a word, and then you can get a sentence, and then so at every level, and then when you get to pragmatics, you're actually at a level where this is like you and I talking, where there's information being communicated that you understand and can give a response to, and that's actually the fifth level, that I can ask a question and expect an intended result to come back. DNA is information at that level. Now, here's the example I would use a lot. If you're walking on the beach 6 a.m, no one's there, you're just going for a nice walk by yourself. No one's on the beach. And in the sand, you see, John loves Mary and written in the sand, and there's a heart around it and an arrow and all that. There's no one else there. Would you naturally assume that a wave washed onto the shore and wrote that?
Yeah.
or would you naturally assume that a person did it? That is the result of a mind?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So when we're thinking about DNA, you literally have to turn off everything you know about messages and how they're communicated, if you're a naturalist, to believe that that's the result of natural forces.
Yeah.
You have to turn off everything you know about what is real to believe that.
Yeah.
Because what you should think is, if it's the most complex system of messages, that has to be the result of the most complex mind that I can imagine.
Yeah.
And natural forces don't have minds. Only God has a mind. And so, like, without even quoting a scripture, just looking at something like DNA and what it is and how it's composed, the fact that with 4 letters, the same 4 letters that compose my DNA compose yours, and we look totally different. We sound different, but God used 4 letters and whatever organization pattern he put them in to make you and the other Joel and to make me. Like, that is the highest level of thinking that I can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And then when you said about the, how many, things in the universe it would have to take to get to like a singular form of life. I remember in that book, maybe it was in The Case for Faith, but basically one of the scientists said, if you took all the carbon in the universe and put it together and allowed it to chemically react at the most rapid rate possible, and left it for, I think, 1 million years, the chance of creating one functional protein molecule would be one chance in 10 to the 60th.
Wow.
Like, those are the odds. That's just one protein molecule. Now, you need at least 200 protein molecules just to get a small kind of amoeba level organism, let alone a human. And you take the vastness of the universe, and just by chance, all of the right amino acids that have to hook in a certain pattern are going to just casually come together and repeat that process as though the universe had a mind, which it can't. Like, that just, you said before, it just takes way too much faith to believe that.
Yeah.
It takes a lot less faith to believe in God,
Yeah.
to be honest with you.
Takes a lot of faith to believe, what is it? Frank Turek's book, Not Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
Yep.
I'm actually reading through that right now.
That's great.
It's a good book. Yeah.
That was some of the required reading before I went to cross-examine.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Yep.
The Roadrunner thing is where I'm up to. Yeah. Great book.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I decided to just start praying for Richard Dawkins regularly. And I just think it would be the coolest thing for him to get saved, because he's such a predominant voice in particularly the Darwinist community. I mean, he's like the foremost Darwinist that I know of, I guess. But man, I also just want to say to you, Alex, like, man, thanks for doing this and doing what you do, because you communicate on a level with people that I can't, and you have given up your reputation in a way that you're in the scientific community, but still fighting for the good fight. And man, I just appreciate that. What you're doing, I think, is a really cool contribution to the gospel and the Great Commission. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You guys too. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Before we finish up, I would like to ask, what books would you recommend for anybody starting out as a new Christian, or maybe somebody who's been in the faith for quite a little while, somebody that just wants that little extra apologetic injection.
Mm. Well,
You got a few behind. If for those listening, he has a whole library behind him.
let's see. Well, one is I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. That's always the first book I recommend if somebody wants to specifically engage in apologetics. But the reason is, like I said, there's the Intelligent Design to God. Like that book takes you step by step through the whole process.
Yeah.
So I can't prove the resurrection with the cosmological argument, but that's just step one. And so now, and that being said, the second book I recommend is Cold Case Christianity by Jim Warner Wallace, because him as well as a detective, he's saying, let's put all the pieces of the puzzle together. What best explains all of these things?
Yeah.
When we make claims, people want to pigeonhole us into, well, that you saying that doesn't prove Jesus is God. Well, okay, I didn't say it did. I'm just saying this proves this. One thing we didn't really even get into is the whole moral argument. And so if morality exists, God exists. And so how do we say that? Well, what is evil? Is evil actually a thing? And I would say it's not a thing. And a lot of ethicists and regardless of atheism or Christianity say this, that it is a privation. It is, I say it's good gone bad. So you have good milk and then it spoils after a few weeks, right? But the spoiled milk doesn't exist on its own. It is a deterioration of a good thing.
That's true. Yeah.
So when you say evil, you're automatically positing good because you got to have something to compare it to.
Yeah.
But once you do that, you got to have some sort of dividing line so you can differentiate between the two. Well, that dividing line is what we call the moral law. So if you have a moral law, then whoever enacts or creates the moral law has to transcend those who are governed by it, because otherwise we're back to the Hitler Mother Teresa thing, that if the moral law is just based on what we come up with as humans, well, we change our minds all the time. Laws change. We change our mind. I mean, in this very country, slavery used to be a law. It used to be legal. Did that make it good? It was never good. It was never not evil.
Yeah.
So does the law changing make it all of a sudden good? No, it was always evil. So if there's not an objective standard that transcends us, or objective standard giver that transcends us, then it's never objective because we're too fickle.
Yeah.
Once again, naturalism can't get you above the natural. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
And so once you posit a metaphysical reality like objective good or objective evil, you've already exited your own worldview. So now you're not being honest anymore.
Yeah.
So anyway, one of the best people is C.S. Lewis. He said he's England's most reluctant convert. He was an atheist. He largely came to faith because he started wrestling with that idea that I just brought up about morality and like, is there real morality? Is there really good or evil? He said, how had I got this idea of injustice? He said, a man doesn't call a line. He just said a man doesn't call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line.
Yeah.
How did I get this idea though? Because you can't just get it if it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So start with those three.
Okay. All right. So that was not enough
Mere
faith.
Christianity is the book I meant. Sorry.
Right. Oh, I thought you were meaning Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Read those two.
Yeah, they're good. But okay, so not enough faith to be an atheist, Mere Christianity, and what was the other one?
Cold Case Christianity by John Warner Wallace.
That's right. Cold Case Christianity. Awesome. Yeah, did you want to share anything else, Joel?
I'm all right.
You're good? Would you like to part with anything else before we finish up?
Man, I appreciate what you all are doing. I appreciate you having me. The goal of my ministry, Proof of the Truth, like I said, is just to help people enter into a confirmed, confident, and eternal relationship with the source of all life and purpose. And so once you get to know God, then my hope, and this is why my thing is called Relentless Pursuit of Purpose, is that you will pursue the purpose that he's given you. So just as you all launched this podcast, everybody's not designed to do this, a podcast, or some people have other talents and gifts. And so we have to use what God gives us to get the message far and wide. So that's what I want. That's what I'm hoping. And I'm glad to be here.
Oh, thank you, Alex. So for any of those listeners, Proof for Truth is how you can get in touch
Yeah,
with Alex.
so you can go to proofforthetruth.org.
Yep.
And you can go, my YouTube channel is Relentless Pursuit of Purpose.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely subscribe to that. And yeah, look up his book if you're a young teenage Christian. I write it down here. Blueprint
for Bible Basics.
Yeah, Blueprint for Bible Basics. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show with us, Alex. You are an incredible man, and it's so cool to see how much wisdom God's given you and the talents that you're actually using them, like the parable with the people and the talents. You're definitely multiplying your gifts and teachings that God's given you. Yeah, thank you for being on the Jesus Magnet podcast. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and maybe YouTube one day. Come back for the next episode.
Amen. Sounds good.